Hello everyone, my name is Alana. Welcome to my channel. Before starting the video, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And give this video a like. Up. Although Young Sheldon Season 6's decision to humanize George Sr. may increase the character's likability, it also worsens the Big Bang Theory spin-off's unavoidable plot development. When it comes to Sheldon's father, George Sr., Young Sheldon, a spin-off of The Big Bang Theory, has written itself into a corner. Viewers of The Big Bang Theory assumed Sheldon's father was a quite essentially flawed, self-centered guy because he was typically perceived by his son and widow as an inebriated philanderer. But while The Big Bang Theory consistently demonstrated that Sheldon had every right to secretly admire his father, Young Sheldon added even more tragedy to the show's worst tale. George Sr. went above and beyond to assist others during Young Sheldon Season 6, which makes his portrayal on The Big Bang Theory startling and contradictory. As a favor to Coach Wilkins, a friend George had previously gone out of his way to help earlier in Season 6, George Sr. allowed Pastor Rob to lead his team in prayer during a game in Young Sheldon Season 6, Episode 9, College Dropouts and the Medford Miracle. This made George Sr. nearly too good-hearted. Although Mary and Sheldon, two characters on The Big Bang Theory, were prone to exaggeration and were somewhat self-centered, George Sr. has never been the awful person that they suggested he was. Therefore, Young Sheldon didn't have to alter the canon of The Big Bang Theory in order for Sheldon and Mary to disparage George Sr. while downplaying his positive traits. But in Season 6, it was more difficult to overlook the difference between the character portrayed in Young Sheldon and the one in The Big Bang Theory. In An Ugly Car, An Affair and Some Kick-Ass Football, Episode 6 of Young Sheldon Season 6, George Sr. took in Coach Wilkins after his marriage collapsed, despite the fact that Wilkins was George Sr.'s replacement after he was fired as the high school football coach. Even yet, George Sr. wouldn't return to his previous position unless the principal also agreed to assist Wilkins get back on his feet by sharing the job. The fact that Wilkins brought Pastor Rob out at a football game in College Dropouts and the Medford Miracle added to the sadness of George Sr.'s impending Young Sheldon death. Mary considered cheating on George Sr. with the young pastor, and as a result, George Sr. obviously dislikes the preacher, even if she and Pastor Rob did not end their romance. Sheldon's father could legitimately object to Pastor Rob attending his football game for other reasons as well, though. When Pastor Jeff found out that Georgie had gotten Mandy pregnant, the church fired Mary. Although Pastor Rob didn't decide this, he also didn't stop it from happening. George Sr.'s disappointment at seeing Pastor Rob at his game is understandable given that the church is Young Sheldon Season 6's true antagonist. This scenario makes one of Mary's stories from The Big Bang Theory more difficult to believe, even if Wilkins may not have meant any harm by bringing Pastor Rob along. Thanks to the character's Bible-bashing portrayal in the previous series, viewers are aware that Mary returns to the church with a vengeance at some point after Pastor Jeff essentially excommunicates her. Mary's eventual dependence on the organization that destroyed their shared existence is a complete tragedy since George Sr. had to pretend to be happy and welcome Pastor Rob into his plotline might become more acceptable in Young Sheldon Season 6 thanks to Pastor Rob's appearance. Mary may have forgiven the church for forsaking her at her time of need if Pastor Rob had asked to have her pardoned and allowed to return. Additionally, this can increase George Sr.'s feelings of jealousy and possessiveness, which might result in his affair and demonstrate that the character in Young Sheldon Season 6 is not as pure as he initially appears to be. The Big Bang Theory spinoff needs to figure out a means to lessen George Sr.'s impeachability before he passes away, even though Young Sheldon might not follow this precise narrative. The popular TV show Young Sheldon has taken the world by storm, offering fans a glimpse into the early life of Sheldon Cooper, the genius with an IQ off the charts. But while Sheldon's quirky personality continues to capture our hearts, there's a hidden side to the story that's beginning to raise eyebrows. The portrayal of George and Mary Cooper, Sheldons' parents. As the seasons progress, it becomes increasingly apparent that young Sheldon might be unintentionally making George and Mary's story much worse. You won't believe how this beloved sitcom is twisting their characters, and why it might be hurting their legacy. George Cooper Sr., played by Lance Barber, was once seen as a hardworking, well-meaning, if somewhat rough-around-the-edges father. Fans of The Big Bang Theory remember him as a blue-collar dad who did his best to raise his family despite his flaws. But over the course of young Sheldon, his portrayal has drastically shifted. George is increasingly shown as an unsympathetic and unloving father figure, straying far from the balanced depiction fans were familiar with. Instead of being the steady, if imperfect, father we once knew, young Sheldon presents him as a man who is perpetually frustrated, with his life seemingly falling apart. His anger issues and lack of communication are highlighted, leaving viewers questioning whether George is genuinely trying to be a good parent or simply failing miserably at every turn. This shift creates a troubling contrast with the father we saw in The Big Bang Theory, one who had moments of tenderness and vulnerability that were largely absent in Sheldon's retelling of his early years. The show, by focusing on George's flaws, risks erasing the complexity of his character. What's worse is that it may ultimately influence how audiences remember him, not as a man who was doing his best under tough circumstances, but as a neglectful, out-of-touch father. If the writers aren't careful, they may irreparably tarnish George's legacy, even though he was a more nuanced character in the original series. Mary Cooper, Sheldon's ever-patient mother, is an incredibly important character in both The Big Bang Theory and young Sheldon. In The Big Bang Theory, she's portrayed as a devout, caring woman who clearly loves her son, even if she doesn't always understand him. However, in young Sheldon, her character has been slowly warped into something much more frustrating and unrelatable. Mary's devotion to Sheldon's well-being is a central aspect of her character, but the show has amplified her struggles to an unrealistic degree. She is often shown as overwhelmed and desperate, making her seem far less capable than she truly was in The Big Bang Theory. Instead of being the nurturing mother who balances her faith, family, and responsibilities, the writers paint her as a martyr constantly bending under the weight of Sheldon's genius and the chaos that comes with it. This makes her character seem more like a victim rather than the strong, resilient woman she was originally depicted as. Not only is Mary's relationship with Sheldon increasingly strained on young Sheldon, but her character's portrayal risks undermining the emotional strength that was one of her defining traits. By focusing so much on her difficulties, the show threatens to reduce her character to a mere punchline or constant source of frustration, which completely contradicts the balanced, loving mother viewers knew in The Big Bang Theory. A key aspect of young Sheldon is the show's attempt to provide an explanation for Sheldon's often strange and oblivious behavior. While this is entertaining to watch, it also reveals that Sheldon, whose narrative drives the show, misunderstands and even undermines his parents' struggles. We get to see Sheldon's sharp mind dissect situations with his usual lack of empathy, but his one-sided viewpoint often distorts the reality of what's actually happening in Sheldon constantly belittles George's attempts at parenting, never recognizing the immense pressure his father is under. And while Sheldon may find comfort in his academic pursuits, he remains largely ignorant to the emotional toll his mother faces as she tries to manage a family where her son is an unparalleled genius, and her husband is struggling to keep it all together. In Sheldon's eyes, his parents' actions often seem petty or illogical, but the show's refusal to provide a more balanced or empathetic perspective only worsens the perception of George and Mary. The lack of nuance in Sheldon's lens can be frustrating to viewers who are invested in seeing both sides of the story. Instead of seeing George and Mary as fully fleshed out characters with their own struggles and triumphs, they are often reduced to simple plot devices or obstacles in Sheldon's growth. This reinforces a negative, one-sided view of their relationship, making their entire journey feel like a never-ending cycle of tension and frustration. One of the most jarring aspects of young Sheldon's portrayal of George and Mary is the glaring discrepancy between what we know about them in The Big Bang Theory and how they're shown in young Sheldon. In The Big Bang Theory, George's death is a major plot point that shapes Sheldon's future behavior, but young Sheldon has increasingly leaned into creating a less sympathetic version of George, which directly contradicts the tragic, emotional moment that was George's passing. The more young Sheldon delves into the past, the more it feels like they're constructing a version of George and Mary that doesn't quite align with the characters we grew to love in The Big Bang Theory. While the show's timeline is already filled with inconsistencies and contradictions, this particular shift risks damaging the emotional impact of Sheldon's backstory. How can we feel sympathy for George's untimely death if we've spent years watching him struggle and fall short as a father figure? And how can we fully invest in Mary's grief if we've seen her reduced to a mere shadow of the strong woman she once was? This growing disconnect could ultimately harm both shows' ability to deliver emotional moments that feel earned and believable. If viewers can't reconcile the two portrayals, it could make Sheldon's memories of his parents feel less meaningful or authentic, casting doubt on the narrative arcs of both shows. The biggest concern of all is whether young Sheldon is fundamentally ruining the emotional heart of the story. The portrayal of George and Mary has evolved in a way that risks reducing their importance in Sheldon's life to little more than comic relief or obstacles to his success. If Sheldon's parents are continuously depicted as flawed and unrelatable figures, it diminishes the power of the bond they share with him, especially when compared to the original series, where their relationship was one of the more grounded aspects of Sheldon's character. As Sheldon continues to grow into the socially awkward genius we know and love, his parents' roles seem to be dwindling, and their struggles are becoming less about their character development and more about Sheldon's growth as a person. But in doing so, young Sheldon could be stripping away the very essence of what made the Cooper family so compelling in the first place: their love, support, and dedication to each other, despite all their differences. By sidelining George and Mary's complexity, the show risks losing the emotional weight that once made their dynamic so powerful. While young Sheldon has undoubtedly entertained viewers with its quirky humor and charming moments, its handling of George and Mary Cooper's story raises serious concerns about how their characters are being remembered. As the show continues to paint George and Mary in a progressively worse light, it risks undermining the emotional impact of Sheldon's upbringing and the core values that made The Big Bang Theory's portrayal of the Cooper family so memorable. Could there still be a way for young Sheldon to redeem George and Mary's legacy? Only time will tell. But one thing is for sure: if the show continues down this path, it might end up doing irreparable damage to the very family dynamics that made Sheldon's story so endearing in the first place. Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay with us.